There's a quote by Socrates. Once I read it, it never really has left my mind. The quote says, "An unexamined life is not worth living." And that quote kind of spills over into what I want to talk about today. And that would be that if an unexamined life is not worth living, an unexamined belief is not worth holding. So today we're going to talk about epistemology. And epistemology is the theory of knowledge. It's an understanding of the scope of knowledge, the validity of knowledge, and the method of how we obtain knowledge. The way I like to think about epistemology is that it's a look, an investigation into what defines the difference between opinion and knowledge. What takes you from just holding an opinion to saying that you know, and understanding the method that you use to span that gap and whether or not it's valid. So, what does that investigation look like? What does it look like to use or apply epistemology? It looks like critical thinking. It is asking questions about how you know what you know. Specifically talking about the methods. So that's what I want to talk about today, is what are the various methods of how we know what we know. And before I get much farther, I just need to remind anyone watching this that I am not an expert. What I do is I read a ton of books and articles, and I listen to a ton of podcasts, and I listen to a ton of books, and I want to share what I feel like I've learned. And so that's what I'm doing here. I'm not an expert, I'm not a scholar, but I've taken a lot of time to learn a lot about epistemology. Okay, really quick before I freeze, I want to show or give an example of epistemology. So I'm going to examine how I know the altitude of Ben Lomond, that mountain right there that's covered in clouds right now. So I know that that mountain is 9,712 feet high. How do I know that? Well, I live down here, kind of at the base of the mountain, and I know just by looking in relation to where I live that that mountain is higher than where I live. And I know I live at about 4,500 feet, somewhere around there. So I know it's higher than that. But I have also been to the top of Ben Lomond. I've been at the peak, and when I was up there, my GPS watch said that the altitude was 9,699 feet. But I also went online and I saw that a bunch of sources online say that the altitude of that peak is 9,712 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and choose to trust the authority of Google and the other sources that I found through Google that say that the altitude is 9,712 feet, because I know through experience and through, understanding technology that my barometer on my GPS watch can be off by about 50 feet. And so I know that since it measured 9,699 feet, that it was within that range of error. And I would trust a source on Google, even though I don't know what they used to come up with that number. I'm going to trust that it was a more accurate tool than my GPS watch, because I know my GPS watch has a margin of error of about 50 feet. So that's kind of what epistemology looks like, is analyzing how I know what I know and trying to decide whether or not it's a valid way to know something. Okay, so let's go over some methods. What are the methods and how do we use them? So I looked on the internet as much as I could, and I couldn't find one list that all of the philosophers and scholars agreed on for epistemological methods. So what I did was I took a bunch of the ones that I found as useful, and then I kind of created some of my own. And so hopefully you can take something valuable from the list that I'm about to show you. So let's go over the different methods. Okay, so first, observational. Think using your 5 senses to gain knowledge. Seeing, hearing, smelling, touching in order to know. So you can see snow, hear snow when you walk on it, smell the snow, touch the snow, taste the snow. You get the picture. Next is systematic. Using systems of words and numbers to gain knowledge. Rationalization. Attempting to use reason or rational thought to come to knowledge. And listen, I use the word attempting in that phrase very consciously, because we are notorious as humans for thinking that we are very good at using rational thought and reasoning to arrive at knowledge. But in reality, we're riddled with biases and logical fallacies. And so just understand that I use that word on purpose. Research. Doing your own research or experiments, using the scientific method to gather data to attain knowledge by becoming an expert, more or less. Authority, relying on the research or expertise of someone else or something else you trust to give you knowledge. Whether that's Google or your dad or a professor, you're trusting something else. Intuition, analyzing one's emotions and kind of your gut feeling to decide what is known. Experiential, knowledge based on personal experience. You quickly learn as a kid that a stove is hot. Inference, taking data or information from one topic and applying it to another topic. If the stove is hot, then the candle is also probably hot, but maybe not as hot. In religion, people claim to have separate epistemology. Some call it vertical knowledge, meaning that it's knowledge that comes directly from above, from God, through personal revelation. Non-believers probably lump that in with intuition. So when we think about something we know, it's valuable to know which processes that we use to arrive at that conclusion. Once we know the way that we came to know something, we need to take a hard look at these methods, at the processes, and determine the validity or the reliability of each one of these methods. So looking at this list, which ones stand out as most reliable, and why do you think so? We can't all become experts in every topic, there's no time for that. If we analyzed everything, we'd all be paralyzed at the most simple decisions. So we have to rely on various methods of epistemology or data filtering to come to a sufficient conclusion. Even the less reliable epistemological methods have a time and a place. In fact, most of our day is lived intuitively, and we weren't even conscious of that. But it's up to us to think about the time and place where other methods are more appropriate and be aware of the power that we're giving each one of these methods in the different scenarios.
If I'm relying on an authority to tell me what to believe, it's up to me to take a critical look at that authority. Are they an expert on the subject? Do they have a good track record of being accurate? Why should I trust them? With authorities, it can get complex because oftentimes our authorities are relying on other authorities. It can be a long chain, and sometimes upon investigation, there's a weak link or a missing chain link. Okay, and just for fun, I want to go through a short exercise here and try and show that the way that you know certain things is gray. It's more gray than you think, and there's probably holes in the knowledge that you hold, and you should be aware of that. So first off, let's talk about gravity, something that we all know to be true, but it's just a theory. No one really knows what gravity is. We can observe it and how it works, but we don't really know what it is. Next is parallel lines. They never intersect, right? That's what I was taught in geometry in all of my schooling, but in projective geometry, they intersect at infinity. I'm not going to try and explain that because honestly, I don't really understand it either. Next, let's talk about eggs. We've all been told that the yolks are the worst part for you, but then they were the best part for you before that. But then you should avoid eggs altogether because they're terrible for you. Oh, but now they're a superfood. You should always try and eat them. Nutrition is an evolving science. It's constantly finding new things and often contradicting what was previously believed to be true. Next, let's talk about superpositioning. This concept is quite complicated, so I'm going to do my best to explain it. In quantum physics, they've discovered that things can be in two places at once. For example, an electron is both here and there, and a cat can be both alive and dead. It is only upon observation that we collapse superpositioning and force the object to be in one place or in one state. A lot of us have an epistemological method that we use way too frequently and we don't understand it. For example, people like me who have deconstructed religion in many ways, we worship rational thought and we worship science. But in reality, we are, as I mentioned earlier, we're not very good at using rational thought to come to a logical conclusion. Along those same lines, we imagine that the information that we receive, the data that we gather, comes to us unfiltered and pure. But in reality, by the time the information comes to our brain, it's already been contaminated or filtered through what our perception wants us to see. I just wanted to quickly wrap up by saying a lot of this is leading into another video that I'm going to make about the value of uncertainty, but I don't want to talk about that right now. I'll get to that in that video. But I wanted to wrap up by saying if you take one thing away from this, I want you to take away a term that I haven't even mentioned yet. The term is epistemic humility. It's essentially humility around what you know. Understanding that epistemic humility is understanding that what you proclaim you know came through a filter, came through your perception, and your perception is not perfect. And all of these methods that we use to know what we know, to try and know something, they're flawed. All of them have flaws. And so I hope we can all be a little bit more epistemically humble.